Welcome back to the show. We're about to learn the secret sauce. Well, appreciate you coming over the bridge, Jana.
Oh, so fun. I love the East Bay. I grew up on the East Bay.
Yes,
so.
and we were just talking about this. So you grew up in Berkeley.
Yes.
So did you go like Berkeley High?
No, just a like small little private school.
Private school? Okay,
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, so were your parents and how'd they get the, like, I'm always fascinated by people who grew up here.
Yeah. Just luck. I don't know. I always think about life. Like there's just these like little macro, micro moments in your life, right? Where you're like, okay, how did we end up here? My parents escaped from communism. They grew up in Czechoslovakia.
Okay.
Really tough life. So in 85, they ended up in Boise, Idaho, where I was born.
Okay.
But they're like, we didn't spend a year trying to escape and get to America. So we had an uncle that lived in Piedmont. And so we ended up in California and then just...
Piedmont, yeah.
Yeah. And just lucky ended up here.
Tom Hanks.
Oh, yeah.
He's from Piedmont.
Yeah.
I know that because my daughter goes to preschool in Piedmont, and I know the whole history. I know the place where everyone gets their wedding and the small little police station. It's a lovely little spot. Like,
Yeah.
one day, and maybe I'll have enough to drop the whole offer down.
I mean, I think your startup's gonna skyrocket.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna quote that. Excellent. So from the Bay Area, but you have been in startups. So like, you've been in tech. You're not an engineer,
No.
correct? But you've been in tech, and you've been in a lot of early, like, cool companies as well. So like, can I ask the question? How'd you get to tech?
I know. So I graduated college in 2008.
From where?
I was at the University of Denver.
Okay.
And I was living in Colorado, and I just couldn't find a job. Again, it was during the great financial crisis.
Yeah, we graduated at the same time.
Yeah. And all of us graduated, and all of our jobs got pulled, and so I moved back, and I ended up finding my first job, just customer support. Like It was just my first tech job. I was doing customer support, such an important role. And that's kind of where I just started to like work my way up. It's interesting because I'm not technical. I didn't study engineering. I studied marketing and finance. But I was able
I have a finance degree.
Oh.
Yeah, I only studied finance, and it was a wrong time to have a finance degree.
Yes. That too. And then really I got my first start at a company called Engine Yard. And that to me is where I learned about like the open source world, Ruby on Rails. That's where I really made friends with a lot of pretty incredible developers. And I also moved to San Francisco in 2008. And so being able to be here, like GitHub started, Slack was down the road, Stripe, like all these companies that we like love and use today that are massive.
Yeah. Did you sign up for a Twitter account around then?
I signed up in like March of 2009.
Okay. Yeah, still pretty early. I remember when it was because I would watch a bunch of YouTubers back in the day when I was in college, and they'd have like the bird noise in the background. I forgot what Twitter client it was, but it was like, oh, what's that bird noise? Like, oh, it's this thing called Twitter.
Yeah.
Everyone's on it.
And RIP Tweetbot.
Yes, Tweetbot.
I love Tweetbot.
Man, but shout out to today's the recording day is when they open source the algorithm.
Wow.
Which is who would have thought they did it? Elon, good on you.
I know. I love Twitter. It's interesting to go back and think about how we used social media. Like when Twitter came out, it was just my friends and I were like tweeting like, hey, come over for a barbecue, or like, here's a photo of my dog, and then to like what it is today.
Now it's like NIMBY stuff and politics and sports, which is it's great that like, Twitter eventually they're still trying to figure their way, but like they found their way previously, and like I remember specifically when I really started using Twitter, it was Google Reader had shut down, and the answer was if you want RSS, just like follow people on Twitter. Like follow all the journalists on Twitter, and you can get what you got in RSS. Not the same, but it was like a different experience. And that's when I jumped in like 2012-ish, 2011, because I'd always had like I had the side Twitter so I could follow the NBA players, but that was about it. That's all I used it for.
Well, my favorite, so I now just use my account kind of to troll a bit, so I'm never serious on it. But I had a tweet about like dating in San Francisco go a bit viral. And so a person on the product team at Twitter reached out to me and was like, hey, how can we make Twitter better for dating? And I was like, oh, I was totally kidding. I was like, absolutely not. And then I was like, here are the 4 use cases that I use Twitter for. Please like keep it. And this was like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, this was 2 weeks ago.
Oh, they have product team members there? I thought they got rid of all those.
Yep.
Okay,
I looked him up. He works at Twitter. He's leading product there.
Good for them. I actually got my first job from Twitter. And I got my first interview, really, string of interviews from Twitter because I was tweeting my blog. So again, going back to like RSS, it's not really a centralized Google Reader anymore. And I had people reach out and say, hey, why don't you interview for this role? Like, you could do that? Like, I came from a world, 2008 is when I graduated, where you could not hand your resume to anybody and they would look at it. And then, lo and behold, only 4 years later, I was able to like tweet something in a blog and someone would give me a job.
Yeah.
So fascinating. And anyway.
But that's such a great point. I mentor a lot of people now. And I think just having kind of an online presence and what your online brand is really important. Or people are like, oh, Jana, you have such a big like online brand now. But I'm like, I've spent years working on it. Like I really kind of kicked it off in like 2020 where I was like, okay, everything kind of shifted. So it's like, I wrote a book, I started blogging, I started like a video. So it's like, it's not easy, but you can do it, right? Like what is your coherent message online, right? Like what are you trying to put out there? I think is important. Yeah. And you do a great job of that.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. And it's the thing is like also very similar to 2020. I think I had like I did have like 4,000 to 5,000 Twitter followers, but mainly developers because I went to conferences and stuff like that, but never really took it seriously where I was like, I still don't feel like I have a curated content stream, but after 7 p.m., that's where like the B Dougie comes out. I actually had a tweet about, because Gwyneth Paltrow had her whole skiing thing. And I was like, oh, wow, Gwyneth could never act out of a cardboard box. And then the next tweet was like the picture of 7. Which spoiler, but yeah. Anyway, I normally would not tweet something like that, but I thought it was really funny at like 9 o'clock at night, and I got a couple likes. I didn't go viral or anything like that. Yeah, I might delete it later.
I think so good. Yeah, I'm like, what gets picked up these days? It's interesting. So
yeah, but anyway. Speaking of picked up, you picked up. You took an Uber, right?
Yeah.
Now, talking about Engine Yard. So you did customer support at Engine Yard? That was your first role?
Yes, customer support and then community. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like growing up, I was always really good at, I was just always organized. I was always like the person in the group of friends that would plan trips or have spreadsheets. And then I was always just very empathetic and loved people.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, how do I make a job out of that?
Yeah, I mean, at a startup like Engine Yard, which folks, you kind of explained it, but like it was like kind of like literally the engine behind Ruby on Rails hosting, and also sponsored. I don't know if they ran events, but they sponsored a ton.
You know, that's actually where I learned like the fundamentals of community building, because we were just doing them, right? There was no term for community building back then. There was no template really. Of course, there were a few, like you had Red Hat and Mongo, I guess, right? You had a few kind of companies that had open source and built businesses around open source, but you didn't have a big model then. And Engine Yard, we weren't open source. We had like a pass that you could deploy your apps to. But we were just doing things naturally. We're like, oh, well, we should probably hire open source contributors to continue working on the projects, to continue advancing Ruby on Rails. And, oh, we should probably sponsor open source contributors. Like we sponsored Mitchell to work on Vagrant one summer. Oh, we should probably like host meetups at our office and bring people together and like sponsor like beer and pizza. Oh, we should probably be at conference. So we just started doing all the things naturally that are now part of like the playbook on how you build developer communities.
Yeah, and like it had all the pieces, because you mentioned Mitchell in passing, Mitchell Hashimoto.
Mitchell Hashimoto, founder of HashiCorp.
Yeah, but when I learned Ruby on Rails back in like 2012, Vagrant was like how you basically, I didn't know what it was, but I knew that it was the thing I had to have installed to get this thing deployed to, at the time it was Heroku, was I think the first place I deployed to.
Yeah.
And it was, the amazing part is like I didn't have to understand anything about the server, anything about hosting. I could just write the Ruby code and a little bit of jQuery to get what I needed to get done and see it live in production. And years prior, like the reason why I have a finance degree is because I was a tinkerer in computers, but never thought I could do it. It's the whole, like, I don't see myself in the space, so let me go to a place that makes money, which is finance. And then I learned really quickly after leaving school or graduating is that you could just do it just by Googling and finding it. So like what Engine Yard and Ruby on Rails and even like eventually what HashiCorp was, that they put enough out there in the ether that you had the breadcrumbs to like, I learned what code was, and I learned you can do websites or web apps. there's like enough that I can Google to get done. And now you have ChatGPT, which you can just like ask ChatGPT to the 3 steps to deploy.
Yeah.
It's great times. But yeah, so the community management, doing Engineer was like sponsoring events.
Yeah.
It was like building the groundwork of what was like Twitter, which is a Ruby on Rails product. Airbnb came a little years later, but all these like every company in Soma, Pinterest, another one, which is Python, but still Django, same sort of ecosystem, just different language. Now there's like a path to like, I can build an entire company, a startup. I can grow community. I can do consulting and build one-off apps. Like, it impressed me so much because, sorry, I don't know if you know the other half of my story. I was actually getting my MBA while I was doing sales, because that's what I landed in after school. And I went to the entrepreneur track, and I was like, oh, I can build a company with no brick and mortar. Like, I can just like have an app on the iPhone and be successful. So like that's what I did. And
I love your whole story.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces to the story that I have out there in the world. Code Newbie podcast, episode number 2.
Yeah.
That I share it because I think it belongs to like people to know, but I love hearing other people's stories and how they got to where they are. And like,
well, I think you and I really started talking because we're both angel investors in Medusa. Like, I think that was like, of course I'd heard of you tangentially just through like the work you were doing, but I think that was our first real like, oh, hey, how's it going?
Yeah. And I just love, and I was doing angel investing because I wanted to learn like the sort of secret sauce behind like starting early companies.
Yeah.
And it was never about like, oh man, this company's going to be $10 billion and like I'm going to be rich. And the truth of angel investing is it's just, you put a bunch of bets out there and like maybe one hits. But in reality, it was like, I just want to be close to founders and like learn their story. Cause I actually got a job after learning how to code into a startup. Cause like, I don't know if I can do my own thing. So I'm just going to work for startups for close to 9 years. And now OpenSauced exists, but it's absolutely amazing. So sorry, I want to go back to you'd mentioned Mitchell Hashimoto. That was your first interaction with him?
I just met him tangentially at like a meetup, or just had heard of him back then. That was a long time ago.
Okay.
But I actually want to go back to what you said about just, I still remember when I moved to SF in 2008, and it kind of feels so I just moved back here a month ago, and I just remember back then, right, where it's just like there was just this drive to build products, right? It like, even at HashiCorp, we never talked about that one day we would be a publicly traded company. One day we'd be $1 billion. That was never, right. It was just like Mitchell and Armand and the early team, like they just had this obsession with like building better provisioning tools, building better security tools, right? Because like we were here in Soma meeting with Stripe and GitHub and all the companies, and it's just like Armand always said he was like talking to those early teams, and they would spend 20 to 30% of engineering resources just like building things that weren't made to their product. Yeah. And so there was, and that's like kind of as an investor now, right? I really look for those people that are just so obsessed, and it's about solving a problem that they've been thinking about for a really long time. Yeah. And even at HashiCorp, right, there was never the motivation of like we would raise a round of funding, maybe just for a minute, talk about it, what it meant, and then move on. Like there was never like, oh, now we're like a unicorn company. We would never pause to think about that, because it's just like, I mean, Mitchell and Armand started the company in 2013, and we didn't go public till 2021. Yeah. So it's like, I think this is all just like such a long game, right? And I think the last kind of 5 years and just this, bull market and just like VC money being thrown around like crazy, right? I think people kind of forgot of like, oh, to build a really healthy, sustainable business, it takes a long time.
Yeah, and it's the thing that I think everyone sort of talks about being excited about, is that everything's come back to earth a little bit. Yeah. And so when you approach problems that actually are sustainable. Yes. So like when I moved to SF in like 2015, everything was a delivery app. So it was like Uber, Lyft, and then there was like the sidecar was like the third one. Yeah. And so they had figured out, okay, taxi cabs has been disrupted. The next thing is now delivery, because it was DoorDash and Grubhub and all these other delivery apps. And then it was also the marijuana delivery, and then laundry delivery. And then everything was like delivery. And it's because like I guess capital was a bit. It wasn't as cheap as it was a couple years ago. But
how many scooter companies can we have? Also,
yeah.
I love this is called like secret sauce. I almost feel like it's hot sauce because I'm like my back is burning and I'm sweating. I'm okay, but I'm like I feel like I'm a bit on the hot seat. So if I'm getting redder, it's because
yeah. End of the day, this is when it really gets heated up. Now I'm gonna ask the hard questions.
Wow, I'm like the lights are on us. I'm just like sweating a bit. So I hope my hair still looks good.
It does. It does.
But I'm definitely like getting rosy. Oh my God.
Okay. Well, we could speed it up then.
No, it's okay. It's like
yeah, it's well, it's not exposed brick because it's painted brick.
Yeah.
But then you've got the old school windows that haven't been renovated.
I just feel it myself like getting hotter. Like I'm like, okay.
Excellent. Yeah. So how'd you get the job at HashiCorp then?
Yeah. I've done 6 early stage startups now.
Oh, 6? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to rattle off all the
ideas?
ideas?
So I did a company called Jivox, which is an online advertising firm. Then I was at Engine Yard. Then I was at a company called StackMob. That was a backend as a service for mobile apps.
Okay.
God, where else did I work? I was at a company called New Relic.
Oh, I'm familiar.
As you know.
That one made it.
Yes. So again, after Engine Yard, I was able to do community and learn about like online, offline community. I mostly just stuck to like developer tools. So I was at New Relic for a few years, pretty early through the IPO. And again, I just loved the early days. I love like 10, 20 people, the chaos of it, right? And that's another thing, right? If you're thinking about kind of entering in tech or switching jobs, it's like, what environments do you enjoy, right? I mean, startups are quite crazy in some way. Like I worked at a startup that like we were about to run out of money. Like it was like before Christmas time and we were about to run out of money. And then we just like got 19 million in funding. And like, it was just like this, like, and like, that's
just quite the Christmas present.
Yeah. So, I mean, startups can be quite chaotic, but I really enjoy them because for me, I really love building things from scratch. So after New Relic, I ended up leaving and I was going to take some time off, but Mitchell and Armand were looking for, founders of HashiCorp were looking for someone to do their first user conference. And so they reached out and I ended up meeting the team. I think if I would have known who they really were and met like the early people, I probably would have never applied for the job because I'm like, I'm in no way smart enough to work here. But I just started like contracting with them and they were just really smart and thoughtful people. And I got to meet the community at our first like user conference and I was like, I want to work here.
Excellent. Yeah. And what year was that?
2015.
2015? Okay. So yeah, only a handful of years after its inception.
Yeah.
But you got to see the trajectory of it, I guess, go up and to the right. Maybe there was some ups and downs in between.
I mean, I got to watch us go from 10 employees to 2,400 employees. I watched us go from 0. Well, we had like a Vagrant VMware plugin that was making about $1 million a year, but like, basically from 0 to 250 million in ARR.
Wow.
From open source adoption to transitioning to like enterprise adoption. So it was a pretty cool experience. And I think startups are just incredible, right? You learn a lot, you wear many hats, and then of course as a company grows and scales, right, you have to like learn to like let go of your Legos, and there's things you hold on to and there's things you pass on. And I always thought HashiCorp was like just really well run. Like I always thought Mitchell and Armand from the very beginning were just very thoughtful, pragmatic, data driven, but they always knew what their strengths were and they always knew what they want to work on and like what they didn't. So we were pretty good about like, we brought in Dave McJana as CEO pretty early on. So we brought him in 2016, ahead of sales in 2016. So I always felt like we brought in the right leadership at the right time. So we were always just like a well-structured, managed company. It felt like just always more mature than I think like people sometimes, like when we did the first user conference, we were 17 people were so surprised, right? Because already we had 4 open source. We announced Nomad and Auto at that first conference. I think people were so surprised how small we were, even though like how quickly we were shipping and kind of how like polished some of our stuff looked.
And definitely. It's on as an outsider, because I didn't know a lot of the server stuff, but I knew to go grab Terraform and Vagrant to go do a job. But I just assumed it was this successful. They figured out the enterprise thing, and I could count on it to use later on because like someone's going to keep pulling the levers or pushing the code, and that's usually the trust I need if I'm going to choose an open source thing. Because yeah, is there a team? Is the team going to be around for a bit? Cool. I don't mind installing this thing and having that team installed alongside of me.
I think that's a really good point, is if you're trying to sell into kind of larger enterprise companies, it's actually the biggest thing I always talk about is building developer trust, but also building trust in the enterprise, because the biggest thing is like they don't want to start adopting a solution and then all of a sudden you're not here in a year. And so what I always tried to do kind of on like the community experiences or the customer stuff early days was make us seem kind of a little bit bigger than we were. So I always tried to make us a little bit more polished, a little bit nicer, a little bit more professional, even if we were like, but not like throw crazy money at it. Because I think that like the perception was really important for like, oh, hey, if Capital One's going to use Vault in production, there needs to be a level of trust that we're going to be here for the next, 30 years.
So the one thing that we did at Netlify, because I was employee 3 at Netlify back in the days, actually, around the same time you joined HashiCorp, I joined Netlify.
Yeah.
On the sort of about page, normally you have like every single person that's hired for the company, and the founders made a conscious decision of removing everyone off the page, including the founders. Yeah. And this is, I think, around the it must have been like before the Series A, but anyway, it was just because they were doing a very big sales contracts, and when people like went to the about page and they're like, oh, well, there's like 4 of you here, like I don't think I'm gonna pay for this enterprise really contract. And so it took everyone down, and they started selling large enterprise deals, which is like I'm sure Matt and Chris would be happy that I shared their secret sauce, but it's years later. But yeah, they were to do larger deals because we could appear as like we were established further along in our journey than most people thought we were. The other thing that we did, we'd get on Hacker News like once a month. And it got to the point where people were complaining because Netlify was so established, and they were getting on Hacker News for like small wins when the expectation should be higher. But it was like, no, it's like literally we invented deploy previews, and we're only like there's 6 of us in here in this office.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, right? Because people always ask me, they're like, Jana, what was like the one thing that you did that like really helped you build community? And I'm like, how much time do you have? But I think it was just all of it, right? It all has to like work at the same time. Yes, the technology has to be great. That's the key, right? But you also need the right messaging, great documentation, design that really connects to people. And at HashiCorp, we never took our foot off the gas. We were just so obsessed. With like what we were building, like helping the community, and so just all the programs we launched early on, we just kept building upon. So that we never slowed down. I think the first 5 years I was probably doing like 70 hours a week, but it was just like, and I think we all were, because we were just like, we just felt the momentum and we just couldn't stop.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like we're still early at OpenSauced and like thinking about the next people we hire. It's not like we're hiring for people who do the 70 hours, but people who want to be involved and be about something that will be bigger than like their legacy and like what impact it makes in the industry. And like that's what I'm currently like. We're interviewing for folks, so if you're interested, definitely could use some engineers. Comment below. But like really, like how interested are you in this problem? And if you're like, okay, yeah, I've touched open source, but like, hey, have you like, do you want to see some cool data about contributors and where they live and where they come from and how often, or some trends? Like those are all the things that we're working on. Like it's very hand wavy today, but like we'll have stuff shipped in the next couple months, really. But that excitement and that energy, like I joined Netlify because I was an early customer. And customer is a stretch. I didn't pay for the product. I was an early user, but they reached out to me because they were reading my blog on Netlify, and I was like writing the blog about developer stuff I was learning, and they're like, "Oh, we kind of need your skill set that you just learned last week. Why don't you come in for an interview?" And that's when I was going to ask a question about DevRel too as well, and how you interacted with like developer advocates and stuff like that. Because like being in marketing and customer success, there's like so much overlap, but then there's also sometimes it's like almost 2 different planes. So like, did you interact with like?
There's so many like. I'm like, I wish we could just like hang out all night. I want to go back to like the importance of like, those early hires. Because they have a big impact, right, on culture, on how you ship. Who they are gets embedded in the company. Like it's something I didn't think about, but like who I am is embedded in the culture of HashiCorp. Like still to this, like I had a call. I mean, I'm friends with a lot of old HashiCorp people, but they're like, Jana, you made your mark, but it's like my personality, who I am, and like that just happens, right? Naturally, because like those early folks are writing documentation or processes or helping build culture, and so like the early employees have a big impact.
Yeah, 100%. And it's yeah, you could definitely hire the wrong people and you'll notice really quickly.
And it's okay to fire people. It's okay to be like, okay, this wasn't right. Like I also think sometimes people hold on to people for too long. So
yeah, it's the thing in startups where it's like, oh, we're all family, we're all in this together. And like the truth is like, so I guess I was lucky enough that I moved to the Bay Area with my first kid already born, had a family. So I was only loyal to my family. Like I was here for opportunity. And so going to like Netlify or even joining GitHub early days, it's like, hey, I'm here because I love what you all are doing. I want to be a part. I will be the face of what this is. At GitHub, I was like developer advocate, so I was a face of certain features and stuff.
Yeah, you were.
But at the end of the day, it's like as soon as I have a better opportunity, I will be leaving and I'll present you with the opportunity. I'll give you a head start, which I did a few times, people trying to poach me to go other places. But I guess what I'm getting at is like, I was able to have something outside of work, but also be as excited to be at work. So like being able to work from home, but also still be able to hang out with my kid. Like I did that. So like today, 5 to 9 p.m., it's always family time. After 9 p.m., it's okay to open up the laptop, do an email, write some code. Before like 5 p.m., it's all work. I try to show up and do breakfast and get kids out the door. But at the end of the day, like I excited about what I'm working on. I just make sure that I'm still excited about other folks as well.
And I should mention that HashiCorp was a pretty mature company. So even though Mitchell and Armand were pretty young and didn't have families yet, everyone else did. And so so it was a very respectful where it's like, oh, hey, you have to go pick up your kids from school, or it's, 5, 6 o'clock. It's okay to close your laptop. So I also loved that it was like a healthy culture. Versus, okay, you're expected to answer email at 10 p.m. So it's not like we were expected to work. I think we were all just so excited. So when we did have the free time, we wanted to work on HashiCorp stuff. So
so you stayed at HashiCorp through the IPO?
Yeah, I was there for 7 years. So early 2015, and then left last January after the IPO. I'm not a big company person, and stakeholder meetings and budget talks are just not my jam. So for me, I'm just someone that really like wants to be excited by what I'm doing. And I'm a person that has like a hunger for learning, a hunger for like building things, launching things, passing them on. And I felt like my day-to-day just felt the same. And so I was like, so I'm doing a disservice to HashiCorp if I stay, even though I'm like, I could have stayed for another 5-10 years. Like I could have just coasted. I had a team. I think I had like 40 people by the end, full-time, part-time. Wow. Like I just things on Drive, but it's like, for me, I'm like, there's still so much I want to do.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. So, and now you find yourself back here in San Francisco, and what's your opinion? Like, is San Francisco back, or like people are moving back here? This is where startups are.
It's interesting. So I lived in San Francisco for 9.5 years. I moved to New York in 2017 just because I was burnt out. I think 9 years of all I did was think and talk about tech, but I'm someone that's multifaceted. I love art. I love going to museums. I love the theater. I love techno house. I just love music in general, live music. And so I think I moved to New York for a while, and I really loved it, right? I got to I was working at HashiCorp remotely, got to close my laptop, got to go see incredible live shows at Brooklyn Steel, got to go to the MoMA and the Met. And so for me, it was really nice, but I've always missed home. It's interesting to have been in New York, and I don't think I was fully plugged into the New York tech scene. So when I left HashiCorp, I kind of looked around and I was like, I'm a bit lonely. Yeah. Because my favorite people are the builders. Like I love being around people that push me, or like today I had a call with someone that has a PhD in federated learning, right? A version of machine learning. And then after I talked to a VP that does trust and safety at one of the top social companies. So it's so for me, I'm I get inspired by people like that. And so I was once I switched into venture, I was I think I need to go back to San Francisco.
Okay. Excellent. I mean, I feel like things are picking up steam. I think people are still sort of migrating back and forth.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that like so we met a couple weeks ago at a happy hour. You had tweeted out
Yeah.
randomly. So like that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
It's like, oh wow, this stuff happening, and I haven't been to all these AI events that have been happening from all these ex GitHub employees and who's it, Danny Grossman. Anyway, the fact that I could just go across the bridge and like hang out with some AI folks and this like be very confused.
Yeah.
That's what I love.
My favorite, I mean, this is just an example of SF, right? It was a couple months ago where I hosted a meetup, and Theo asked Leah Culver, who worked at Twitter, he was like, hey, you guys changed the emojis. That's impacted, the way I use it or the way this community uses it. And she's like, oh, let me fix that. Right. And so it's just like only in a city like this do you get to talk to the people that are like building the products that you use every day. And that's just like a recent example, but it's something I've seen. Yeah. So it to me, it feels like San Francisco's back because it's to be able to talk to the people that are like solving similar problems or going through similar things. Like I've been hosting a lot of just kind of like technical founder dinners and events. And that's really special, right? To be able to like you're just ideating or you're kind of a series A or you're a company that just went public. So to be able to talk to these founders in like these like private settings and get like they share their experience is like invaluable. And that happens here.
Yeah. And that's like when I first moved here, I worked engineering at this small startup and we had a hard problem in payments. And the thing that we learned is like, why don't we just ask our friends if they've solved this before?
Yeah.
And like just being able to tweet or DM somebody or just like walk down to like Pinterest and be like, hey, let's do like a quick little, I don't know if the office is still open, but do a little quick chat and like, here's our problems. Like, let's see if we can solve this together.
Yeah.
And I was actually talking to one of the Vercel team members about like React Days. Tom Okino used to have hosted lunches at random Soma tech offices. And sometimes at Facebook. I didn't go to those ones. It's too far. But just like meet with the React core team. And that's, you can't beat that.
No. So I'm sure like there's incredible tech communities all over, but there's just always been a magic of San Francisco, but I'm biased because again, I started my career. I grew up here. I moved to San Francisco in 2008. So I really got to be a part of building iconic companies and got to watch iconic companies get built, right? And you got to just hang out with them,
Yeah. You're like the, well, I don't know. Forrest Gump is not the best analogy, but like you're like behind the scenes. You're so close to so much of these cool technologies that have been shipped.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I've always tried to do, it's our careers are long. And I think sometimes we forget that, right? Sometimes people are like, oh, Jana, your job is so nice and cushy. But I'm like, for the first 10 years of my career, I had to go into an office every day. And I had to do really tough, like I was IC work for 10, right? And then slowly, like, I got to like really craft a role. And HashiCorp was really where I was able to craft a role for myself that fit just kind of like exactly who I was. But I think it's just like, imagine your career is long. And then also the connections you make, right? It's like build deep friendships. Don't be transactional. It's so cool because I just moved back here and I'm like, I still have friends from 2010, 2009 when I first moved here, because it's just like be good to people, treat people well, and just know that the community, like, yes, there's a lot of people, but it's like the community is also small, right? And you never know, right? You don't never know. It's like, oh wow, I moved back here. I'm like, well, thank goodness I didn't burn any bridges, and I have friends here.
Still show your face at the Blue Bottle.
I didn't just burn things down and move to New York. So
yeah. So so you talked to a lot of operators, technologies, founders. What's your most exciting thing that you're seeing right now today?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what's really cool is, again, I go back to that, this deep wanting to learn. And so for me, I've had a pretty incredible career now, right? I've been working in tech for 15 years and I've just switched into venture. But I've never chosen jobs based on kind of financial gains. I've always chosen companies and solving problems based on, do I like the team? Do I feel like this is an important problem to solve? And am I going to learn something? And I feel like that's kind of stirred me well. And what's really cool is, so I started angel investing last year. I just started deploying my own capital, and I was like, oh, this is incredible, right? Getting to kind of work with a bunch of different founders, getting to help them with dev marketing, community building, all that stuff. And then I just joined a fund, and the way they presented it to me, there's 4 of us in the investment team. The firm's called TQ Ventures. The partners, they were like, "Hey, Jana, like come sign up for a lifetime of learning." And I'm like, okay.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
I was like, is that what they're offering me? So I think what I'm excited about is kind of just like I'm learning finance and accounting, and I'm understanding, because again, like I'm like, did I know HashiCorp was going to have a $15 billion IPO? Like, did I or did I just kind of like get kind of lucky and choose well? So it's really cool.
But you also have to say, like, you impacted that too as well. The stuff that you did helped like keep the founders, but also the rest of the team not focused on the stuff that you were excelling at. And I think going back to having the early team, and like your early team members are the ones that you can trust to go own that space and not have to be like, oh, you know what, customer success is not really there, marketing's not there, I guess we gotta like clean house and turn over folks. Like, to be able to have that trust that that person can do the thing, and then like even me as like currently CEO of OpenSauced, like I can focus now on customer adoption, which is like something I haven't been able to focus on the last 3 months. Now I can just 100% be like, well, 100%, 85% focus on, hey, customer, we've got a product. Here's what we have so far. If we ship this, would you pay for it?
Yeah.
And that's the conversations with my sales background I can do, but I could never do if I'm sitting there like trying to ship code.
I think you have such a great background.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite eclectic. I've picked up a lot of different things along the way.
Yeah.
And the thing is about me going through this background, but also anyone listening, you're like, oh man, I wish I could do that, or I wish I could do that. But like, if you're always moving forward, you tend to pick up things. And that's why I got the job at Netlify, because I'm like, oh, hey, I have a sales background. I actually pitched a 30-60-90.
No.
And what was not supposed to be an interview, it was actually supposed to be a coffee. Like, hey, you're a user, let's talk to you. And I was like, hey, have you all thought about this? And they're like, well, actually, we just got funded, and we want to hire you. What do you think? And I was like, oh, okay. I completely switched, and I was like, you know what you should do? Okay, I'm going to share more secret sauce of Netlify early days. I pitched basically the traveling salesman, which is an engineering problem, but you literally do that as a salesperson. Where you pick a structure and you do it. So I picked 31 NFL cities, and I said you should pitch every conference, every boot camp, every college, and every local meetup. And every time you get a conference talk, do all the other 3, or every time you get a meetup, do the other 3. And if you don't have all 3, manufacture it. So I would get a talk accepted. I go meet organizer and be like, hey, this conference is happening. I'm going to be in town representing Netlify. Do you want to move your meetup to the night that I can do it? And they would say yes all the time, because every meetup organizer can never find enough speakers. Yeah. So if someone walks in and says, yeah, sure. Boot camps, they can never have enough experienced engineers in the field talking to boot camp students. Always a yes. I'd actually have 2 or 3 boot camps in certain cities that I would meet with. And then I would also meet with like customers and stuff like that. And like, that's what I pitched in that coffee meeting. That's what I did when they eventually convinced me to do DevRel. Wow. But that's like the insight I had from sales that I brought into my engineering role, and that turned into developer experience, and then turned into my job at GitHub. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean.
No, it's systematizing that. Yeah, that's so smart.
It is, and it's like, and I do get a lot of people get the aha moment, like, oh wow, I get why you're where you are, and it's because I've always been very much, I'm introverted by nature, but I don't mind getting in front of a camera or on stage.
Yeah.
And I don't mind like elevating somebody else and giving them a platform. So I've always been behind the scenes until I have to be in front. And then as soon as I can find other people to replace me up front, then I could have step back. So like at GitHub, we built the DevRel team. I was the first advocate officially at GitHub in 2018. But we built a team where like Rizal, who's been on this podcast, can now be the face of Copilot. And like Mish Manners and Michelle, who's based in Impact, can be that person. And then we got other people on the team who can just replace me. And then I was able to be like, oh, okay, I can like orchestrate what the systems are and just do what I wanted to do, which was basically this. I was doing Open Source Friday interviews with maintainers. And that's the job I left, that I sort of manufactured myself to have during the pandemic.
I feel like I should ask you. I have like this Cafe Jana video series that I'm trying to. So it's like now I'm like, okay, I know you asked to interview me, but now I'm like, what's the secret sauce?
The secret sauce? Yeah, I mean it's so the secret sauce is really in this. We're gonna wind down because I know that sun's getting like crazy hot now.
Oh, now you're getting. Yeah, I've just been but I've just settled into it. Like
yeah, the secret sauce is like when you do content and you do like podcasting or you're trying to get a feature, it's not about the people watching you. It's about the person sitting next to you. And the thing I learned pretty quickly, like when I did this podcast called This Developing Story, and I would just reach out to random people I looked up to and get like 70 downloads a week. It was like nothing, but I would make so many good connections to like Ryan Florence taught me how to do React because I happened to sit next to him in a meetup and be like, hey, do you do podcast? Cool. Like Ken C. Dodds, same deal. It's like, saw him at a conference. Hey, do you do podcasts? I got a podcast. And he came on and just did my small podcast. And it's been a friend since, and like been also a champion of like what I did and how I got to where I'm at, and like countless amount of people who like championed me because I'm just like, hey, I've got this random podcast that I host on Netlify. Do you want to come on board and like you talk to me about it? It was like 3 questions: who are you, what do you do, and how did you get there? And like the last question is what I cared about. The other stuff is like what everyone else cared about and what the person I was sitting next to cared about. And that's the secret. It's like just have a platform and be friendly, but the platform is not the game. That's just basically have a way to interact with people that you want to talk to.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we knew each other from only, I think we crossed paths in remote world. So when you came out here, I was like, oh yeah, let's meet IRL.
And then you came to the happy hour. Yeah. Like I love that. That was
and it's and you have an infectious personality, and I know if people know who you are, they're like, oh, I want to know who Jana is because Jana knows people I know.
I feel the same way about you. Like we're like,
okay, well,
like, wow, you were just very kind and smart and like
I try.
Great so I'm like,
well, I appreciate you you coming out, doing the conversation, and sitting in the hot seat.
Yeah.
And folks, stay saucy.
Thanks so much.